Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer? Or that perfect hiking spot you heard about? With the Overlook mobile app, you can create personalized lists of places you've been and want to go, and always see everything on a map. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family, or keep your secret spots private for you. The best part? No ads cluttering your lists, and no one selling your interests or travel data. Download the free app at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/Nashville to see some CityCast lists on a map and in your pocket. Overlookmaps.com. Collect and share the places that matter to you. Today on CityCast Nashville, we're going downtown for a look at how the expanded Central Business Improvement District is impacting the neighborhood. Are unhoused neighbors being treated with dignity? Who's removing benches? And what's with all the private security? Nashville Scene columnist Lena Maisel is here to explain. It's Monday, August 25th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. You write the Scene's regular Street View column, and this month you're taking a look at the new Central Business Improvement District, or CBID, which in July expanded to include the Gulch. So to catch our listeners up, what is CBID and who is in charge of it?
So it is a little bit confusing. Even I was initially a little bit confused researching it for the story. So like you said, the CBID used to encompass downtown and now includes the Gulch. Basically, businesses contribute some money through tax and a fee on some retail transactions. And then in exchange, there's an organization called the Nashville Downtown Partnership, and they give some services to those businesses. So things like litter pickup, beautification, security, things like that.
What concerns did people have about this expansion to include the Gulch?
The council debate was over whether to combine the bids, and people had a few concerns. Some concerns were around the fact that the Nashville Downtown Partnership hasn't been particularly transparent about their finances in the past, but the vast majority of people were really worried about the security firm that they hire to provide security downtown.
Their company is Solarin, is that correct?
Yeah. So a lot of people in the Nashville Downtown Partnership talked a lot about their outreach for the unhoused community downtown, but people in opposition were primarily talking about Solarin and kind of the behaviors that they'd seen. Some outreach organizations and other media outlets have reported that Solarin have really mistreated unhoused people downtown. So things like kicking them awake, power washing belongings, people kind of being told to move along for no reason. And Solarin also had a whistleblower tell WSMV that as an employee, they were told to kind of arrest unhoused people but leave tourists alone. So some people at the meeting addressed that as well.
And that's what you're hearing from the service providers of what they're experiencing?
Some of the facts about people being kicked awake, power washing the belongings, and then being told to move along, that actually came from people at Open Table Nashville when I interviewed them and asked what they had kind of heard from people who were actually on the streets.
Well, like you mentioned, the Downtown Partnership does do some great outreach through their staff to the unhoused community downtown. But what's the disconnect between the outreach and this Solarin security force?
I think one of the important things in this conversation is that the Nashville Downtown Partnership isn't primarily a homeless outreach organization. So outreach is part of their focus, but it's not their main focus. When you listen to their outreach workers talk, they are so earnest and they really, really care about what they do. And I think they are making a good impact. Open Table said a similar thing. But overall, there aren't necessarily enough resources that those outreach workers can really point people to long term. So in a way, one of the things Open Table said was that outreach isn't necessarily a useful long-term solution. The solution is affordable housing and more resources to actually help people have that long-term impact. One of the other things that came up was that the Nashville Downtown Partnership's contract with Solarin is actually up for renewal in 2026. I did ask them when I emailed them about whether they would renew or whether these conversations kind of would impact that decision, but they didn't answer that question. And then the Nashville Banner had kind of asked them previously And they basically said maybe to the Nashville banner.
Maybe. Huh. Okay.
I mean, it was a long...
Well, thank you for asking that, because I think we're all wondering this.
Yeah, definitely. It was a long, detailed maybe, but it was, in my mind, kind of a maybe.
Well, so what is the council member, Jacob Cupin, who represents downtown? What is he saying about these concerns?
When I talked to him, he definitely wanted to draw a line saying that the enforcement wasn't about the people. It's not targeting specific people. It was more about the behavior. So he mentioned, behaviors that make people feel unsafe or unwelcome downtown. That was kind of the big theme that he was going back to.
Can we dive into a little bit more of what does that actually, what behaviors does he refer to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So he was specifically mentioned, I think that there had been some incidents of people, urinating and defecating on the street as an example. But I think the overall conversation about making downtown safe and clean is a pretty interesting conversation. I think overall, when people talk about sort of perceived unsafety, behind that, a lot of times I do worry about stereotyping and how that would play into, why someone would call a security company and who would assess that call. I'm not really calling out Councilmember Cupin here at all. I think just overall, when we talk about public safety and perceptions of public safety, profiling is always kind of just sort of below the surface of those conversations.
Well, I just want to state that, the last time I was downtown, I witnessed a tourist urinating. And then, just a couple of feet from him urinating, I saw a woman throwing up. So it's interesting what types of behaviors and who the behavior is coming from that we're actually targeting.
Yeah.
Your colleague Eli Modica also reported last week about some benches that were removed on Korean Veterans Boulevard. Can you tell us what's going on there?
This was a really interesting story to come out so closely after the bids combined, actually. So the city just removed 8 metal benches along Korean Veterans Boulevard. Councilmember Cupin told The Scene that he wanted the benches to go somewhere kind of more useful where they'd be used by everybody. So somewhere more like a greenway or different street. This was an effort between the Downtown Partnership, NDOT, and Councilmember Cupin. So it's pretty sort of closely tied to the bid stuff. And those benches, importantly, were a place where a lot of people were sleeping or resting. And after they were taken away, I know Eli reported that some people were then sleeping in the median once those were gone.
And NDOT is also being targeted by critics right now for not following the city's downtown code design standard, which prioritizes seating. What is the downtown code and why don't they need to follow it?
So the code overall is basically rules for how to plan the architecture of downtown, what goes where. So anything from signage to having access to parks to how many trash cans a building should have. For all the sort of fellow code enthusiasts who are listening, the code is publicly available, and the seating recommendations, I looked it up, are on page 91. So just a shout out to the other code enthusiasts out there. But where it says avoiding hostile architecture, it is a recommendation, not a requirement. So it's not really a violation of the code. And I think this is where, we can sometimes run into these issues where the code recommends certain things, but you're not in trouble if you don't do them. It's just a guide for how people want downtown to look and feel, basically.
Yeah, we talked about hostile architecture on last Friday's News Roundup. What does that mean?
Well, in this case, I would say hostile architecture is architecture that prevents people from sleeping or resting on it in this instance. So things like if there is a bar in the middle of a bench, so you couldn't lie down on it, that's kind of an example. And I think it's important to also say that taking these benches away are just moving those people somewhere else. It's not as if then the problem of why those people were sleeping on those benches goes away. That goes away with investment in affordable housing and other resources. But now that the benches are gone, the people who are sleeping on the benches are just going to be, I guess, theoretically away from downtown.
Is this part of criminalization of homelessness? You can't even sit down now. Even during the day, you can't even sit down.
Yeah, I think this came up in some of the conversations about downtown with Open Table. And I think there is this structural disconnect that I hadn't really considered, where Nashville, infrastructure wise, has put a lot of services and a lot of actual employment downtown. So a lot of people who are experiencing housing insecurity or are unhoused are employed in the construction industry downtown. A lot of shelter access is downtown, a lot of services that people can use. Even the bus system, a lot of the routes still go through downtown. So on a large scale, we're kind of asking people to come downtown to access these resources, but then it can feel like companies like Solarian or people generally are then trying to push the same people away from downtown, and sometimes in ways that are pretty distressing. So there is really, in a way, a disconnect between one part of the city infrastructure and then this other part of the city infrastructure who's actually saying, we don't want these people downtown.
How much say can Councilmember Coupin have over this realistically?
That is a great question, because when people were arrested for the felony camping violations, he did have a lot of say and he really advocated for people. And I think he was saying as well, like, unhoused people in his district are still constituents. He still really wants to advocate for those constituents. But because the structure of something like the downtown partnership in Solarian kind of works outside the government, there is only so much that he can say.
Well, we're looking forward to having him on in the near future to address some of these concerns. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into another way that security downtown is raising some eyebrows. And we are back with Lena Maisel, columnist at the Nashville Scene. So we've also covered the issues happening with downtown bike lanes and their connectivity on the show. And it seems like every day another Nashville cyclist posts photos of the downtown partnership or MNPD or a delivery service blocking a bike lane with their vehicles. So last week, former District 6 council candidate Daniel McDonald posted on Blue Sky that his commute was blocked by security vehicles on Commerce Street. And the private security officer doing the blocking responded to his complaint by threatening to punch his teeth out and saying, "I hope you get hit by a car." We can't confirm that those officers are in any way related to the downtown partnership. So who are they?
There are a number of private security companies downtown. And because of that, I think because they don't have as much connection to the city, but because they're privately contracted, it is a lot more difficult to report incidents like the one that Daniel McDonald posted about, which is really sad and scary. I also really don't understand the weird hostility that people have towards people on their bikes. I feel like I couldn't think of anything less threatening or less likely to make me angry than just a person on a bike.
No, I've seen drug out like screaming matches with people in big cars versus tiny little bikes, and it is astounding.
I do also want to say that I think that there's such a missed opportunity here because there is so much security downtown. And I would love to see them focusing on some real issues that downtown is facing that are so important, like drink spiking. I mean, could you imagine if we leveraged all of these security people to try to address drink spiking downtown? That seems like such a useful use of everyone's time versus yelling at someone on a bike.
Or even just like the pedestrians and how people are speeding through those high trafficked crosswalks. Do you get the sense that anyone is taking accountability for all the forces at play downtown these days, regardless of who they're working for?
So I do think that part of the conversation over the bid merger caused some accountability. So there is a grievance process now that was amendment to the legislation combining the bids. So now if people have an issue with a security contractor that has been employed by the Nashville Downtown Partnership, so that could be Solarian or someone else in the future, they do have like a formal complaint process for that. I don't know if any other organizations have that in place, but that was one thing that sort of came out of that council conversation over the bid.
Who should be accountable for these folks? Do you think it's a city problem, or should it be the private businesses down there?
I think that it's going to be a little bit up to the public to hold everyone accountable for it, to be honest. I don't think that people are necessarily going to step forward and volunteer for that role, but also because a lot of these companies are subcontracted, it is a little bit more difficult to get a formal process in place to hold them accountable.
Overall, how would you describe the vibes downtown? You know, we recently, well, just in the phase of this growth, we spoke with Vanderbilt professor Bruce Berry recently, who wrote an article and called it a theme park of intoxication, which I thought just nailed it a little bit. What new elements are being added by CBID and these various security forces, and how do you think they're changing the environment for tourists and locals?
The question of, who is downtown for is becoming kind of this evergreen question that we keep asking, every year as downtown changes. I think that there is a push from the city, from like a policy point of view, to make downtown a place that isn't just Broadway. The downtown guidelines place a really strong emphasis on that. So, there's a push for green spaces and more to do during the day and making it a more easy place for pedestrians. If that vision happens, I think it would be honestly awesome for everyone. I think we think of it in terms of the impact on local people, but I think it would be awesome for tourists. Like, I'm kind of a nerdy, quiet tourist. I think I would love to visit a city that's more like that than a city that is just bars and honky tonks. I've been working on the Street View column for 3 years now. I'm about to start the 36th article. So I really, really love doing it. And I cannot say enough good words and praise about my editors. They're fantastic. But I have been getting the sense that it's all just becoming kind of one story over and over again. And that story is just Nashville needs more affordable housing, but we aren't building it. And it's becoming this pattern of like every story that I do that is focused on a local issue, behind that story, behind the story about the benches and the bid expansion, it's always just, we need more affordable housing, but we are not building it fast enough.
Well, so we are a hyper-local podcast, but I would like to zoom out and just discuss nationally about the fact that right now we're seeing federal troops in the tourist areas of Washington, D.C. As President Trump has stated, he more or less needs to take over the city to address all the crime and homelessness there. However, we know that crime is actually down significantly in D.C., but supporters of increased security and sweeps of our unhoused neighbors say that this kind of policing is completely necessary for safety. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I think it kind of gets to the heart of some of the issues downtown as well. I'm going to paraphrase this in a way that may not be exact, but when I was talking to Open Table, the source there said such a great quote where she was saying, we can't police our way out of a homelessness crisis. So I think that a lot of times, the wish for more security, more policing, it comes from a place of get this problem out of here. But the real solution to the human being on the other side of that interaction is actually to point that person towards resources and to have the actual resources there.
I was talking to a friend about this exact thing, and she had heard on a podcast, she couldn't remember what it was, but they compared it to musical chairs. And, you're taking a chair away and, then there's a person without a chair. And that's exactly what we're experiencing all across the country, but especially what we're seeing here in Nashville.
Yeah, I think it's musical benches in Nashville by the sounds of it.
Oh my gosh, nailed it. Well, so I hear that you spend a lot of time in the UK, which, as we know, is very famous for, their bars, their pubs, and drunk people. But also they have bike lanes and socialized healthcare. Do you have any tips we could take from the way things are handled there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are definitely still drunk people in the UK. People do understand the bike lanes more, but I would argue that might be because the driver's license test is so difficult. But I think that's probably a story for another time. I can give a couple of examples because I have lived in the UK, so I have kind of lived with these things happening. So in the UK, the doctor is free and every prescription is a little bit over £10, so around $13. So for me, like an EpiPen or, if I wanted some painkillers, doesn't matter. It's about $13. And for a lot of people, it's free. If my car stopped working, it would still be easy to get places. I think for me, like it's a privilege to take those things for granted, but it really shouldn't be. In the conversation about, comparing the US to other countries, a lot of people, I think, perceive it as really elitist. And I kind of used to think, oh, stop it. Like that wouldn't work here. Stop trying to basically talk down on the US. But it's really completely the opposite of elitism. I want everyone to have the brain space to not worry about affording medical care and not worry about what's going to happen if their car breaks down, if they'll be able to get groceries, if they'll be able to walk and bike somewhere safely. I've experienced how much of my brain that frees up to not worry about those things. And I really, really want it for more people. But I do see a lot of hope in Nashville. And I think the way towards those things is civic participation. I know it can be really frustrating sometimes, but I feel so hopeful, even as someone who's seen probably hundreds of council meetings now and seen the kind of regulars at council who are really pushing people to do the right thing for their constituents. I think Nashville has really, really fantastic civic participation. It's such an exciting place to report on in that way. And I just want to encourage people, if you want the US to be more like the UK in the ways that I described, then keep going, keep showing up.
And that's why we love Nashville, because there are so many people fighting the good fight here. We can't wait to see what you write next. And again, thanks for joining us. We'll have you back soon, I hope.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'd love that. Thanks so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Doodles!